background before we get in. Andrew and I graduated from the same school together, and ironically enough, he was number 3. Well, he went to play hockey for 2 years, his junior and senior years, so I missed him through that time as far as what was going on in his life. And then we met shortly after that, and it's all in chapter 3 in the love story of our book. But we'll get started here. So we're going to be covering 3 different topics. We're going to be covering mental illness, relationships, and personal development. Mental illness. Mental health is a sickness, just like diabetes, heart problems, eye problems. We all need help.
Breaking down the stigma and labels. When I think of stigma, I think of there's a lot of different types of stigma around mental illness, and not just one type, but in my life I've experienced stigma, people thinking that I gave myself schizophrenia, or I created that mental illness. And I think there's also another aspect of that where somebody may say it's just a biological problem and nothing else, and I think that that's kind of misleading too, or limiting. I feel like I have more than a biological problem. I have that for sure, but I also have personal issues that I can work on and try to develop, and I've had to deal with both of those things.
So Andrew and I have a little bit of a different perspective on labels sometimes. We try to balance out the fact that a label is there and can hurt us and affect us negatively, but then it also can really help us and provide a lot of information. So I could label myself anxiety, depression. He has schizophrenia, some bipolar and addiction tendencies.
At one point in a hospital, they literally checked off every box, which is, like I was experiencing all of these symptoms. The overriding symptom was schizophrenia. They treated me for that specifically. They gave me medicines for that, and it was an accurate diagnosis, which is important. But there's labels can help, but they can also be misleading. For sure.
And they can change. And
yep.
We have 2 children. We have our daughter that's 11, and we have a little boy that is 4. And he just has overwhelming amounts of energy. He's a boy, he has asthma, those things correlate together. He's never been diagnosed with ADHD, but Andrew and I weren't afraid to say, when we drop him off at Grandma's, not to scare Grandma and Grandpa, but just kind of bringing up the point that he does have some ADHD tendencies, and can you just be aware of some of these behaviors and how this is having an effect on us, and how we're getting tired because he's bouncing off the walls, and then we give him his inhalers and he's bouncing even higher. And we just wanted a little bit of sympathy and understanding that this is something that is helping us to know how to move forward in this, to know how to address these behaviors, whether it's star charts or whatever we can do, that this is a real issue and that we need to pay attention to this. Even though we never brought him in, he wasn't on medication, we weren't afraid to say, wow, there's strong ADHD behaviors and symptoms coming out. Sometimes one more thing to be said with breaking down the stigma and labels. So Andrew has such a heavy-hitting label as schizophrenia, and people are just like, oh, how's Andrew doing, or how are you doing? And I just want to point out that sometimes people that are struggling with something like anxiety and depression are really, really struggling, and I don't feel that I always get the sensitivity or compassion that I wish that I had sometimes, because of how serious it can feel, and when depression sets in and how you lose all motivation and you feel hopeless, and so I just want to point out that it's something to really think about when you throw out labels, and just be aware of the value, but then also the harm that can be involved. in it.
And specifically with her, she lives with me. I have schizophrenia, and some people in our life are going to maybe be more sensitive to me because I've had these obvious breaks or obvious periods of very visible suffering, whereas she's more suffering behind closed doors possibly, and you don't want to try to rank that suffering. I think that's misleading, especially I've experienced depression and anxiety too, and it's horrible. It's hard to say that schizophrenia is worse than this type of mental illness, and I think that's just what we're trying to point out with that subject. Acceptance. I've really struggled with acceptance. I still struggle with it. It's partially I don't want to let her down. I don't want to let my kids down. I don't want to say today I have schizophrenia. I don't want to own that. I want to say that this doesn't affect me and that I'm okay. Younger, I didn't know I had schizophrenia for a long time. I thought the medicines I was taking was anti-drinking pills, or I really had no idea that I had schizophrenia, and that's really common with the illness. If you know somebody going through that, it's just so common that awareness isn't there. So for me, acceptance has been a really hard thing. My family was really instrumental in helping me right away gain that acceptance, and my wife, of course. It's been a long journey for me with this topic, and I think sometimes in society too we don't accept it either. We want to brush it off, or say it's not real, or it's just life, or this mental illness thing. It's personal flaws or personal failures.
It was one of the reasons we wrote the book. We went so many years where we had our struggles, but we would make it through however we did it, and eventually we just started talking about everything that we went through together. And when he was having these psychotic episodes, we're like, wow, this is crazy that we have actually experienced this together, and maybe we should document this and try to figure out what we actually did to make it through. And it was so healing. I went for years where I would just feel uncomfortable talking to my friends about it because I felt like I was talking bad about Andrew and that he'd feel embarrassed. And when I started talking about it more with others, it was very healing.
Symptoms. My first recollection of symptoms was as a 12 or 13-year-old kid. I was laying in bed at night and I heard these deep voices that were not my own. I don't remember being afraid of them at the time. I just remember those experiences. They weren't my own thoughts. I know what it's like to have my own thoughts and voices in my head. But this was something different. And for me, it started at 12 or 13, and it went away, thankfully, for a few years. And then at 16, I moved away from home, and I started playing with Team USA, the Olympic development program for hockey. And under that immense stress and pressure, I just fell apart within pretty much weeks, within a month, really. I managed to hold on for six months with that program, but ended up needing to go home. There was a lot of doubt and wonder, question marks around what was going on with me, because at the time I was the best hockey player in North America for my age group, and a month later, people were starting to wonder if I was going to be in society at all. So the symptoms that I went through were extremely schizophrenic. I started writing movies about satanic Santa Claus and a regular Santa Claus, and honestly the plot line doesn't come back to me. I can laugh about it now, but at the time it was pretty scary stuff. And since then I'm trying to speed through this. I've had a lot of symptoms. Fast forward, it's an okay subject now for me. I've been in recovery for close to a decade, not quite there, but I still experience symptoms, but they're just not as bad. I deal with a lot of side effects from my medications, And symptoms from those medications can sometimes include hallucinations or just really bad experience that's hard to put into words. But yeah, I could spend so much time on symptoms.
So I walked into Andrew's life, I was the first one to call him, which is also mentioned in the story, which is unheard of for me because I really do battle with anxiety and get so worked up over things. And I was pretty young, I think I was 19 at the time, but I walked into his life and I showed up his house, we went on a date, and I'm looking at his house and it was just full of paintings everywhere, which I'll pass around some of the paintings and it'll give you an idea of some of the things that were going on in Andrew's brain and what came out in art form. And I was just in awe. I didn't know what to think. I was very open-minded and this is interesting, very thought-provoking. And he wasn't on his medication at the time, and he was actually doing well. This was after his first hospitalization that I came into his life, but it was about 6 months later that he ended up in the psych ward again, and he was a threat to himself. He was a threat to others. He wrote a threatening letter to the White House. There was times where he was taking a knife and running across his neck, thinking that his neck was made of sand. Just extreme behaviors. It was so not the Andrew I fell in love with or knew. I knew that he was so sick without a doubt. There was full acceptance because this is not Andrew. This is a brain that is misfiring, and how can I help him? What needs to be done is all that I could think of. So there was a lot of symptoms there for myself. I've had them throughout my whole life, just struggling with low self-esteem, struggling with the anxiety and depression and suicidal ideation and all of that. So I feel like we were a fit. I knew how to relate to him in some ways and talk about things.
Risks and benefits of medications. I wouldn't be here today without medications. So, you know, that's the first thing we got to cover for sure. Medications are just a huge part of my life, and I have to be so diligent to take them every day. I can't cut my medications by 100 milligrams, by 50 milligrams, by 25 milligrams. Like, I have it dialed in, and I've worked with psychologists and people over time to make sure I have the right level of medications. And that's a really long, hard process. That took at least almost 15 years. I'm still working that out as my kids grow up and got to go to a softball game. I can't be going to that softball game on a release of about 300 milligrams of medications. It makes it very difficult to, you know, just be in that environment. So that's kind of where the risks come in too, is like these medications they're heavy. They're really hard on your body. They can be hard on your liver, your stomach, just your whole being, really. That's kind of the sad reality. I mean, people are spending a lot of money to try to fix that problem right now, try to find better medications. But I am thankful for what I have, and I really wish I could communicate it to you know, family members that have loved ones that are taking medications, that the labels on the bottle just don't do it justice. You know, it says you may get drowsy. That's a lie. You are going to be drowsy. You are going to be, you know, very tired. And I don't drink alcohol at all because if I do, you know, pretty good chance I wouldn't be around in a few years or 20 years, however long it would take. I've had problems with my liver. I was at dangerous levels from valproic acid. I've had problems with forming blood clots and just different issues. Thankfully, I was able to take an upturn on my tests, and I'm doing fine now. But you know, definitely after 15, almost 20 years on these medications, my body has definitely paid a price.
And there's a short bit in the book about me and my experience with medications. And of course, when I went in and I filled out the questionnaire and they're like, wow, you have anxiety and severe depression, you need to get on something. I took something for a while and I just thought to myself that I probably could use my own coping mechanisms and skills without the medication. So, you know, everybody is different, and there probably is a medication that would make standing up here a lot easier for me, but I guess it's just something that, you know, we all have that decision and that control over ourselves, so we can decide what we want to do. And but yeah, again, it's one of those issues where you have to see the pros and the cons with medication, and it's very helpful, but it's also very scary, and it takes time. It takes so much time for people to find out what meds and to balance them all out with the body chemistry. So being patient and finding a med provider and really communicating with them or with anybody else that can help monitor if you're struggling to know how you're responding is important.
I'm going to share one more thing on medications, just a short story. I take 650 milligrams of Seroquel daily, and I take 1,250 milligrams of Depakote daily, and I've got it fine-tuned to a system where I have to have all these things in place before I can lay down and go to sleep, or else I'm going to suffer for 3 to 4 hours of just dehydration, struggling to breathe, just a host of problems. And I've worked with psychologists, we've tried other medications, and they didn't work out for me. So not everybody is going to suffer like this, but I've had to go through that. And one time, recently I remember, I accidentally took my full dose of nighttime meds before I was lying down in a dark, dark room, in a peaceful room. And I realized it when it all set in, this massive dose of medication, and I had a really, really difficult time getting out of my chair, up the stairs, and into my bed. And then from there, once I got to bed, I wondered if I'd wake up in the morning. So, again, just if you have a loved one that is on these medications, you got to try to really show them grace and understand what they're going through.
There was a lot of times in our relationship where he was on the medication, whether it was an afternoon dose, and he was trying to still work out the kinks of the best time to take the meds and how much. And I would look at him, we were pretty young at the time, we were probably early 20s, and I would look over at him and he'd be in the chair, and it was like looking at somebody that, just like a man that had no control, like he could have been in a nursing home because his mouth is hanging open and his head's bobbing, and I'm like ready to, go and do fun things and go on a date, and I'm looking at this really sick guy, and it wasn't because, the typical, it was definitely the medication and just battling through the schizophrenia.
And here's the hope part of it. The hope part is at that time I was taking 900 milligrams of Seroquel and 2,000 milligrams of Depakote, which is really high. I think the therapeutic dose for Seroquel now is kind of the high end is around 700 or 800. I've heard doctors argue about that. But anyways, 900 is really high, and that's what she had to endure those first few years of marriage. And I don't struggle like that anymore. I have a lot more energy. So
it's embarrassing to admit this, being in the professional world, but I did try 50 milligrams of his Seroquel at one point, just because I was young and I was naive and had my share of drug use in the past, and I'm like, well, I gotta see what he's going through. What is this gonna do to me? And it was terrible. I slept for hours and hours, and we were driving home from a road trip. My head was bobbing, and I needed to fill my stomach with something. So I'm like, stop, we need to get ice cream, and then through me trying to sleep, and it was a terrible experience. It was not good. I shouldn't have ever done it, but just to know that this is what he was experiencing on a daily basis.
Addictions. I really struggle with addictions. I still have a very addictive personality, And a lot of people in my hometown and in the hockey world in particular blamed all of my issues on addictions. And when you have a mental illness, any type of mental illness, your brain is typically in overdrive, you're not living in harmony. You try a drug to get out of this terrible state of mind that you're in, and that first time you try that drug, it's, you know, you've been living your life in this terrible balance, this terrible place. You try that drug or alcohol, whatever it is, and you find relief, and you feel good. And so you come back to that, and then pretty soon you're in big trouble. But you know, addictions and mental health, they just go hand in hand, and we're still wrestling as a society to understand that, like, mental health problems really push people to drugs and alcohol. I still really struggle with nicotine. It's part of how I cope with everything.
When I meet with clients, I often come home smelling like cigarettes because the majority of my clients do smoke, and it helps them. And not that it's great for them, but that's part of the hand-in-hand thing. And I've had my share of use of drugs and alcohol to help get through those difficult days and to relax myself. Now I am pretty addicted to running. I don't know if there's any distance runners out there, but some people know that feeling of I'm a runner. I like the feeling I get, the high that I get from running. I need to run even though my knees are saying, no, don't go any farther. But I love it, and so I have that. I struggled with an eating disorder as well, where I would do the binge eating, where I wouldn't eat, see how long I could go, and then I would eat so much to be full, and just the insecurity and the low self-esteem was a huge problem. So those are just examples of some of the addictions that we've been through.
Positive aspects of mental illness, I don't always think of mental illness as a mental illness. There's some good things that have come from this, and there's some neat things that my mind does. I have an imagination that allows me to create art and music and be creative and write or do different things. I enjoy that. It's hard to imagine my life differently. I don't just think of schizophrenia or whatever people want to call this as a bad deal. It's not all bad. And I think that, you know, that stigma or just saying that this is just an illness is a limited scope of it. You can treat the illness with medications, and you can learn to use these disadvantages as advantages too. Some of these things can help you succeed in life too, and I think if we could work with that with more people, I think maybe we'd have more success. And you see that in private practice too. People are encouraging art, people are encouraging art sales, trying to get people that are struggling to use their gifts and their amazing creativity that they do usually have.
We joke around that Andrew can be the night shift driver on road trips because all he has to do is just avoid taking his medication and he's good to go. He can stay up the whole night, and so that's a plus.
It's not fun in the morning, but yeah, I can do it.
So when I can't express enough how interesting of a character Andrew was when I first walked into his life. He doesn't ever want to talk about this, but he is an amazing musician. So he plays the guitar, drums, piano. I think he was composing music on the piano at second grade level, where he got attention from paper and teachers, and very impressive. And drumming, he was doing that at age 2, and we were on our drive down here, we were listening to some of his music. I mean, he's written prolifically, just composed tons of music. It was so fun. I keep telling him, we got to pull it out sometime, Andrew, and share it with others. And we have done that in our hometown, but I don't know if we're quite ready for that yet. But it's amazing. It is like one after another songwriting and just keeps advancing. So his brain is awesome. And then just, you know, some of that extra energy and creativity. And for my positive aspect, having anxiety, I think I'm just driven. I feel like I care so much and I have the sensitivity that I want to really use that. And as long as I'm steering in the right direction, I feel like it keeps me going and motivated to try to relieve some of that and making healthy choices. Relationships, because mental illness is too tough a road to walk alone. NAMI.
Tolerance, empathy, observe without judgment. I've not always been the most tolerant person, and when I've been sick, I've struggled with that for sure. And I think I probably had a chip on my shoulder from, climbing the ranks in hockey, and then all of a sudden being in a psych ward and losing everything. I was mad, and I think I took that out on people, and I had this attitude of maybe, I've got it worse than everybody or anybody, and my parents were good in helping me to get out of that immediately. She's been amazing for that every day of my life since then, and it's just really helped me heal to understand that I'm not the only one suffering, and that we all are in this together,
And I think this is where we can cross the lines outside of the professional world and really focus in on some of your personal relationships that you have every day, whether it's at the store or with your neighbors or whoever, because if you look, there's a lot of people that we can get to know and ask questions and not have those walls, because if we don't ask the questions, we just won't have the understanding of what's going on in their lives. And it's just so important, and we do have to be tolerant at times because we are very unique individuals and very different from one another, but when we create that division and walk away, then we're never going to have that positive relationship that so many people need and so many people are lacking. And I can't get over how many people in my work, when I walk into their lives as an ARMS provider, which stands for Adult Rehabilitative Mental Health Services, and I go into the community and I ask them questions, and I end up being their closest relationship. And they don't have positive relationships with their family members, they've had a terrible marriage, their kids have cut them off, whatever it is, and they really need somebody to walk into their life and just be there to not judge and not say that there's these things and I have to cut you off. They just need that acceptance to start in their recovery.
Our marriage really struggled when I couldn't be tolerant and put myself in her shoes and understand that she was a person and she was going through things too, and I think in our marriage, we suffered for a long time with me not understanding that, when I suffered with schizophrenia, so did she, and that really helped us move forward when I started to see, we were in this together. And I think that probably started our healthy communication, which is the next topic. And communication hasn't always been easy for me, and it hasn't always been easy for me to communicate at all. I've had a lot going on in my mind, a lot of, whether that's delusions or thoughts of grandeur, being caught up in creative projects too much, or just lost to schizophrenia. Communication has been difficult, and it's something I've worked on and has taken a long time to get better at, and it's so important, especially in a relationship of any kind, but definitely in a marriage, whatever close relationship you have.
I feel like timing is one thing to remember when it's communication. There are times where either yourself or the person you're trying to communicate with is not calm enough. So sometimes just being patient and waiting and being able to tell when they're ready to listen, they're ready to hear you out, is very beneficial. Sometimes we just have a fear that we're going to say the wrong thing, or we're going to offend them, or they're going to respond however negatively they could. And so we don't do it, but you do have to sometimes get out of your comfort zone and I encourage with my clients a lot of times, and even with Andrew, and I think he's come to just accept that sometimes I think complaining is okay. I don't want to call it complaining, but it's just letting it out, it's talking about it, venting. You need people in your life that you can share this stuff with, and thankfully Andrew has come to let me go off and off about the same thing over and over, because that's what makes me feel better. And it's not just complaining, but it definitely helps me.
Mindset of a student, just trying to learn. I've had to learn a lot with schizophrenia and how to manage it, how to manage my medications. I've had to learn, how am I going to take these meds and not get so sick? When am I going to eat the food? How am I going to time the food and my medication intake? There's just so many aspects, and I don't have time tonight to go into everything that I've had to learn with schizophrenia. The book has a lot of it, and if you want to get a hold of me some way through the website or whatever, just almost 20 years dealing with this, and there's just so many tips that a doctor probably just can't know because they haven't done 20 years of medication. So I'd like to help.
So in this, trying to remember not to be black and white, and one of the phrases that I love to live by is that there's always more to the story. If we keep asking questions and keep digging, you're going to find out so much more information that's going to be helpful in knowing where to go, especially with my clients at this point, because Andrew's been in recovery so long. It's just, what else am I going to find out about their childhood or their financial situation or their ability to, their education, whatever it may be, just, putting the puzzle pieces together and not assuming in the professional world that we have it all figured out, but really learning from our clients, and they can teach us a lot, and taking those experiences and sharing it with others has been very helpful as well.
Caring, serving, helping. I think I've been lost to my own ambitions. It's probably something I've struggled with since a young child. I'm just kind of ambitious in general. Like, I had really grandiose dreams always. Like, I got to be the greatest hockey player of all time, or musician, whatever it was going to be. I was just going to devote all of my attention. And I don't know if I always had the most like an attitude of a servant. I think I've been a loving person, but recovery really started more for me when I started focusing in on my children, caring for them, putting them ahead of my needs or my desires, especially for her. Like, how can I help her instead of like, what painting am I going to do, or what creative project am I going to do, or world domination, or whatever it is. Yeah, I could go on for that too for a long time.
I mean, this is pretty self-explanatory, but it is so important, and sometimes it's a difficult thing to do. Sometimes serving and putting others before ourselves and helping, and we're overwhelmed and we're tired and we're busy. But when people feel that and they see that, and I think Andrew did, and I think he reciprocates that now, and I get a back rub almost every night. I don't know if it's out of guilt or what, but
no, it makes me feel better. Like, if I can serve somebody and see them feel better, I feel better. It works that way for me.
it's working
I
well.
lived the other way a long time and it didn't work out. So I just tried to rechannel my life.
It's been huge. It's been such a transformation, and I don't think I don't know, and it does go both ways, and it can be a beautiful thing, and whether it's your family or, in your job, whoever it may be, people need more of that in their lives.
Turn off negative sources. I have a lot of triggers for schizophrenia. There are just so many things I have to avoid. Thankfully, I've gotten over a lot of stuff, but watching the news nowadays for me is just almost unbearable, even like 10 years ago.
It is for most of us.
Yeah, like now on Facebook, like you can read the news and then you can see how everybody reacts to the news. So you get like 2 sets of the news. So there's just so many things that pull us down, and I don't have that much energy to spare. The medications are dragging me down every day, so I've got to find out how am I going to have energy for the kids, for her, how am I going to do this? And oftentimes it's, cutting out TV or, trying to eat a little bit healthier, trying to make sure my body's working right. There's just so many negative sources I've learned to turn off in my life.
And I have done so as well. Facebook is terrible for me. I can last like 5 to 10 minutes and I'm just like, oh, and I get all depressed afterwards. And so that's, for me, with the children I've worked with, it's been so many times I've walked in the home and the kids struggling with aggression and, took a toy and smashed the TV, and I'm like, well, asked the mother, well, what video games is he playing, And of course they're the most violent, inappropriate ones for his age. He just could not handle that. And so turning off some of that, turning off the negative music, the lyrics, and it's getting in your head, that's been helpful. But even more so than some of that outside stuff, like I had to turn off some of the comments that people were saying to me when Andrew and I first got together. People were like, oh, schizophrenia, do you know the statistics of, success and recovery and this? And
I'm very lucky too, but that she didn't listen to the statistics. I think if she would have, we wouldn't be together. So
there was a time where I literally, even though I was going to school for psychology at the time, and I had a psychology professor that's warning me and everybody, I had to turn some of that off because it wasn't helpful. And the books and everything that they said was not helpful. I had to look at Andrew as an individual, and those were negative sources to me. So sometimes that's necessary.
Knowing when to push, this is just in reference to someone struggling, especially struggling with mental illness. We all have people in our life that, we can see they're going down a destructive path that's not good. And we're always afraid, when do we say something? Do we interject? Do we risk of, stepping in there? And in our book, I think you can find especially how she pushed for change in my life and pushed for me to wake up to some of the things I was doing. She failed at it and she had success with it, and you can really, it's all there, it's all
the story about how I almost sent him back into the psych ward the day after he got out. I didn't like what he was saying, and it was just so delusional, it didn't make any sense, it made me uncomfortable, and that night was bad. That night ended in a lot of tears and hours of me trying to just re-explain myself and where my intentions were coming from, and just trying to de-escalate the whole situation. So it has been years of trial and error. Sometimes we make mistakes, and so giving yourself some grace and realizing that most of the time, if your intentions are good, you can go to sleep better at night, knowing that I've tried, I've made myself available, because there's so many people with mental illness that isolate and they can't have healthy relationships in that time, and they cut you off and it hurts, and you can grieve and cry and be upset and go through that process of, you love that person and you want to care for them, but they're not ready for it. And so, just letting them know verbally and saying that you're there for them is sometimes all you can do until the right timing. But this question comes up all the time for people. Is when is it okay to confront this person, and how do I know, especially when they start withdrawing?
Self-sacrifice, I think we kind of covered that in caring and serving a little bit, just trying to put others' needs ahead of your own, and that has been kind of a mantra for me to live by for the last almost a decade. And you know, taking the medications every day, I kind of feel like that's a little bit of self-sacrifice too. I could probably live on my own, not married, no kids, with a lot less medications, but I want to be there, and so I can't have the delusions as much. I got to make sure everything's going well, so taking the medications is kind of an act of self-sacrifice for me, for sure. Paying the price, as I like to say, every day.
And I believe that usually there's some sort of blessing or long-term benefit that you'll get from that, and you don't always see it right away. Sometimes you do, but sometimes it takes time, and so just kind of hoping for that and being patient for that. And so self-sacrifice was very apparent in my life because I wasn't doing what everybody else was doing when I was 19, 20, you know, the college years. I had to move back to Grand Rapids when I really wanted to finish up with my schooling at the university I was going to, and just a lot of different things, and the timing of having children, the timing of our marriage, we had to postpone 6 months, and all these different things. But you just have to realize that sometimes there will be those long-term benefits. Personal development. Mental illness is not a choice, but hope is.
Letting go of pride. I had a lot of pride. I think, like, as a hockey player, you sort of needed a certain confidence every time you went on the ice, or you'd get hurt. You know, you had to be ready to go, and I had that built into me pretty strongly. So I had a lot of pride, and I think if you have success at something, you sort of get a big head. And I had success, and I got a lot of attention, and a lot of NHL teams were taking me out, trying to get me to, you know, come play for their team, and promising $4 million a year. And so I had this pride, and it's been so hard for me to say, you know, I have schizophrenia, I got to take these medications, I'm never going to be able to work a full-time job. You know, just to accept some of these things. I am a stay-at-home dad, and that is a full-time job. Like, so I don't want to discredit that, but it wasn't necessarily a choice or my skill set. I had to kind of been a baptism of fire to be a stay-at-home dad, because I've definitely pursued academics very, very, you know, seriously for music and for other things, and obviously hockey. But I quickly learned that with this illness, with the medications, I had serious limitations, especially energy, just having to have the right environment all the time to make sure I wasn't sick. And to do that, I really had to let go of pride. I had to say, no, I guess I can't do these things. You know, I can do them, but I can't sustain these things. I can't do this consistently. And I almost lost our marriage and our daughter at the time. We only had one child, and I think they were ready to be done. I don't think I deserved to be the father at that time. And I was really holding on to that pride, really saying, you know, I want this professional career. And I got really sick. And so I really needed to reevaluate my life, and I did. It was super hard. I got really depressed, letting go of that pride, really depressed. And I bounced back, and yeah.
So I also lived by the words, pride comes before a fall. And it was just so amazing to see the transformation in Andrew when he started letting go of trying to climb this ladder of success that looked like a different way from what success in my world would look like. And it was a beautiful thing, but for years it was a struggle. He had so much ambition and was always trying to do the next greatest thing, and it was so overwhelming, and I couldn't keep up, and I tried to be supportive at the same time, but it was one thing to the next, and it never seemed to work right. I just also remember it was pretty cute when I go visit him at the psych ward, and the sense of pride that he had when he was walking around there, because at this point in time he thought he was going to save everybody in Minneapolis, you know, like he had this control and he was walking around and I'm gonna take matters into my own hands, and everybody just had to wear a blue handkerchief around his neck and somehow that was gonna help, and all these delusions. It was so out there, but at the same time, I could see the potential in Andrew, and that he wanted to use some of that energy and this control to help people. And so somehow when he started letting go of that pride and just basically just that, letting go of that pride and realizing that he didn't have to do it all on his own, it didn't have to come just from him, but others were there to support him and help him, and it's okay right where you're at, and that acceptance was a huge part of our life. And we've also had to use humor to get through some tough times. And that's pointed out in the book as well. So just being able to laugh at ourselves, and everything doesn't have to be so heavy all the time, and that's been very helpful.
Identify the problem. My wife's really good at this. I'm not always good at this, but maybe you can relate. I don't know. Laughter. But she's really good, and she's really good at her job, and it's really, really important. If you want to get the right medicine for mental health, you really got to know the problem. And I've been diagnosed wrong before. There's a lot of people that have. It's hard to get somebody to articulate who's suffering. It's hard to get that person to say exactly what's going on or what went on in the past. So, you know, getting an accurate diagnostic assessment is really tough. I think that's something that limits us in the mental health field, is getting somebody that's struggling to report honestly, openly, so we can find that right medication or get them connected to the services they need.
So yeah, identifying the problem, the first step to problem solving, and it can be challenging at times, and it's not good for me because I'm a perfectionist, so when I'm always seeing problems, it just creates a lot of work and frustration, but it's very important.
Set realistic goals. I covered that a little bit. I think it's just so important. I'm really lucky that my parents, when I first got out of the psych ward, they brought me there for the first time. They had no idea what was going on. They knew I was about to die and just so sick. They had no idea what was wrong with me. They thought maybe it was mental illness, but they brought me there. And then after that, they really did set realistic goals for me. They just wanted me to come home, take these medications, sleep, and walk. I mean, honestly, that's what I did. That's all I did for, I can't remember how long, but it was quite a while. And I think too often we send people to a psych ward, and then after 2 weeks or a month or whatever it is, you know, we're saying, all right, back to work, you know, and I just think that's really unrealistic. When the brain is broken, it needs time to heal, just like when your arm is snapped. Just think of a pitcher in baseball who tears a rotator cuff. It might be the end of their career. For sure, it's like 9 months recovery time. So why, if it's one torn rotator cuff is 9 to 12 months, maybe their career, why are we asking somebody with a broken brain, which is way more complex and way more important, how are we saying, you know, you're ready to go? I think that's a moral issue that we should be addressing. Environment, we really believe in environment as far as how it contributes to mental health, where we grew up, how we grew up, our background, what were we exposed to, what kind of trauma did we have, just all those different factors are just so important. So if you're counseling or dealing with mental illness, if you can understand the environment, it's just so important to get the full picture. And I know you deal with that every day, so this is kind of your big thing.
Well, it is, and just also seeing positive environments.
Right.
So when I went to Andrew's home compared to my home and the family dysfunction and poverty that I grew up in, and I was like looking at his house and his parents, and the way they ate their meals, and I was like, wow, this is so different, but it seems so normal, but it's not to me, but it was neat. So he had a very positive, supportive environment, and if you don't see where people are coming from or asking questions, you are going to be missing out on half of, if not more, of the information of what is so vital to knowing what can help or what they're dealing with at the time. And just knowing how to create your own healthy environment and what you can do. And we mentioned some of that, turning off some of those negative sources. I love to come home. I feel so much more at peace when my house is clean. It's just, I will feel calm and relaxed, and we'll have a better dinner. It's like that.
Holistic lifestyle. I had parents that really valued that, and Steph has been an amazing advocate for that. She's way healthier than I am, and she kind of pushes me to be more healthy, for sure. She's into exercise, and I used to be into that, and now I struggle to do it, But there's just so many aspects of dealing with mental illness that we leave out, for sure. Like, I've struggled with a lot of stomach problems since I started taking all the medications, and the healthier you live, like from every aspect, the more suffering you can alleviate, and you can start to feel better mentally too. So trying to take the full picture of how you're going to treat yourself, it's just so important.
So for this, mind, body, and spirit, what can you do to calm the mind? Is it meditation? What can you do for your body? Exercise and eat nutritious meals, and spirituality and what can I do for my spirit has been huge. We haven't really talked about that, but that has gotten me through everything. I didn't have the support systems growing up. I slipped through the cracks because I was a quiet, well-behaved girl, but I was struggling so bad in elementary school. My home life was it was terrible, and there's a lot of people that are coming from that, but I relied on spirituality, prayer, just letting it out. When I talked about complaining, it was like I had to tell somebody. So in the quiet bedroom, I was talking to God, and then filling my mind up with really positive messages from the Bible was so important, and then just some of those positive messages about loving others and having hope, and that was huge. That got me through a ton of stuff.
For me, with that subject, spirituality was something I really sought after when I was first diagnosed. I remember being at my cabin with my parents, and I woke up in the middle of the night just relieved one night, thinking there is a God. That's all I knew, and I just started. I read just about every book I could get my hands on about God, and I ended up coming to the Christian faith. And unfortunately, right away, my delusions and my ability to read the Bible were detrimental. Not all the time. Some of the time it was good, but it was detrimental for a little while. And it wasn't until I let go of that pride and continued to work on my character, I was able to find spirituality, finally authentic faith, simple faith, true faith, and my life just took such a better turn. And every night used to be such a dread. Before I take those medications, it'd just be the worst thing. I just so depressed that I had to do this, and now I have this peace every night. I lay down in bed just about every night. I can lay down, I can talk to God, and I can feel light. And it's just, I can't imagine without that. Utilize the resources and programs. You guys got great programs here, obviously, and working on getting more. Where we're from, our community is very progressive in this dealing with mental health issues. I've seen really positive changes in the last 20 years. When I first was sick, I can't believe how many more people were misinformed. So it is moving in the right direction. So I like to try to hold on to a little bit of that hope. There's still a lot of mistreatment, there's still a lot of stigma, there's still a lot of negative stuff, but I have seen a trend. I have seen people starting to value, for one thing, the services that are out there for mental health, and there should be no shame in seeking out using these things.
Right. Sometimes it is difficult to navigate the system, and it feels like there's lots of hoops to jump through and to finding the right programs and insurance and all that. But just try to utilize them and encourage others to do so, because people do carry shame in some of that at times.
I think our message is a message of hope, and that you can live a full life with schizophrenia. Even as severe a condition as I was diagnosed with, I think sometimes people like to, with my condition, just because I started to do better, they think, well, he's got a lesser version of it, you know, or he doesn't experience negative symptoms. And you know, just this year was my first time actually understanding what negative symptoms were. Somebody actually pointed that out to me, and I was like, wow, I have a lot of those, you know. So even in the midst of that, I have a joy, I have a peace. I feel so lucky to have her. I think her story is amazing, and that's one of the main reasons I wanted this book published. I wanted her story to be heard, and how much she risked too. I don't want to be unrealistic. She did risk a lot in marrying me and sticking by my side, and but yeah, don't give up hope and be patient in suffering. It has taken, you know, first symptoms as a 12 or 13-year-old kid, 18, it's out of control, and now I'm 35, and I've only been living in this positive realm since starting towards 30, so it's a long journey, and you know, there's no way around that, but there's a lot of hope.
This concludes our talk.
Thank you very much. Maybe 10 minutes for questions and answers. And then we can have signing up for CEUs and book purchasing and so on, and then they'll kick us out at 8 o'clock. And as is predictable, I'm an old prude.
I already see the anxiety, unfortunately, in her, but I just have to do what I can, you know, even with my son and talking about the ADHD, it's just how do I address these behaviors and these symptoms? How can we manage this effectively, you know, and trying not to hold on to that fear of what can happen.
Yeah, and I've used my story a little bit with her. Just I like being honest with her. I don't want her to be shocked, you know, when she grows up. I don't think that's any good. If all of a sudden she's like, wow, you know, I've been in the dark on this. I think it could be a sense of hurt. So I think it's important that she knows, and she does know. She sees me suffer too, unfortunately. She knows that, you know, when I'm getting ready for bed on the road, whether it's a basketball tournament or whatever, you know, I got these 4 bottles of pills, and you know, divvying them out. She's like, wow, that's a lot. You know, those are big. What are those? You know, so she's curious and smart. So you gotta tell her what's going on.
Just knowing how they're going to receive it, you know, what kind of level of maturity, I think is just so key.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely encouraging the open, honest communication. And yeah.
Thank you for your presentation, but I wanted to make a comment about addiction.